All right. It is now officially Game Week 2017 edition of Under the Dome. It's been a long time coming. This is probably one of the most anticipated regular seasons and preseasons in a long time. I'm your host, Alan Ulrich. I'm here with Sean Williams tonight on Under the Dome. How you doing tonight, Sean?
Doing fantastic, man. Just be looking forward to nothing but a preseason game. It's football. I watched the Hall of Fame game the other night. Was really impressed with a few aspects of both the Cardinals and the Cowboys offenses and defenses moving towards the season. But everyone who even remotely has any knowledge of me knows, it's all about the black and gold. And this week, Thursday night, we will be live from Cleveland, Ohio, and that just absolutely terrifies me. Let's pay the bills. I want to thank Fan First Productions for sponsoring our show. We invite you guys to join us on iTunes and on YouTube and subscribe to our content. Every subscription means a whole lot for us. And outside of that, real quickly, I wanted to give an update on Miss Donnie. Miss Donnie is in the hospital in Jackson, Mississippi. Not sure of all the details, but please, you guys, please continue to send thoughts and prayers in her direction. She can certainly use them right now. And so, moving on, without any further ado, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce a good friend of mine. I'm going to let him go through his resume because I'm sure if I try to, I will most definitely screw it up. But the last counts I had, this man is a professional scout for the Canadian Football League. He is a study guru, and you can find quite a bit of his work on Canal Street Chronicles. Here to introduce the Rev, and I call it the Rev Deuce. Deuce Windham. Welcome to the show, Rev. How are you tonight, man?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much for having me, guys. Always nice to get invited to things like this, and it's nice enough for you guys to think of me. Yeah, you don't really have to throw out accolades. I mean, I was very honored to be able to do some independent scouting work for the Saskatchewan Roughriders this past off season, and I do regular work with ESPN 97.7 here in Monroe. But it's just me, man. I'm just a Saints guy trying to make a living.
Aren't we?
Well, it's great to have you on the show, Deuce. It's great to have you on the show. One of my favorite things about your shows that you do is your film breakdown. I think they're very educational and helpful. Get people to understand, and this is what I'm trying to do here too, is get people to understand play works, but why it works the way it does. Because there's a lot to it that people just don't see because they don't know quite what to look for. So you doing what you've been doing the past, 2 years, 3 years on Facebook really helps kind of bring it down to the fans' level of understanding how the game is played.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I try to tell people, I mean, the game's not that complicated if you just take some time and if you ignore all the big fancy words. I mean, you don't need to know what a sting route is. You just need to know what type of receiver's running a route downfield. I mean, leave the fancy vernacular to guys like, Scouts or John Gruden on Monday Night Football. But I think fans really want to know more, but so many are afraid that they're either too far behind or because they didn't play, they can't understand it. But, it really benefits because once you know more about the game, it makes it easier to watch the game and understand why this didn't work or why this did work or how we're better in this area instead of it just being a crapshoot every Sunday morning, not knowing how it's going to go.
Exactly.
Well, I want to draw even more attention the what you seem to have more out front and prevalent right now, and that's your film studies that you're doing today. As a matter of fact, if you guys want to go to our Facebook page, it's posted on there, the film study of wide receiver Brandon Coleman. And I know that in the recent couple of weeks, you've done Hendrickson, you've done Lattimore. If I remember correctly, you also did one on Adrian Peterson as well, right?
Yeah, I've done Adrian Peterson, Marshawn Lattimore, Marcus Williams, Alex Okafor. I did bring out one on Brandon Coleman today. It's a little bit shorter than normal because NFL Game Pass was acting up. So it's only training camp film. So take that with a grain of salt. It's several plays from training camp. I still think you see some positives. Yeah, it's been a series we're trying to do about 2 a week. But we'll see how that goes.
Deuce,
okay, we'll get right into it.
I was just going to say, Deuce, give us a kind of a thumbnail sketch then of Brandon Coleman. Where do you see this? They've been reporting this is probably his best training camp since he's joined the Saints. Where do you see him fitting into the offense?
Well, I think he is one of the best number 4 receivers in the league, and that might not sound like a compliment for some, but what a lot of fans have to understand is the type of receiver that Brandon Coleman is. The only position he could really fight for on the team, Michael Thomas has. And no matter how good he really does, Michael Thomas is going to keep that position, which is your split end or your X or whatever you want to name it. He's not a flanker. He's not a fast, small Brandon Cooks to run the flag route. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean he can't have an impact. He was really good in the red zone, very big target. He's 6'6", over 200 pounds. So there's a lot that he provides. I think the main thing for fans, though, they've expected a lot because he was hyped up because of the size. They have to keep in mind, though, that he was injured with knee injuries coming out of Rutgers. He went undrafted. He had a 4th-round grade, went undrafted because of injuries. And we just haven't seen a lot of burst from him or a lot of speed and movement. And we're seeing that in training camp, and that's what makes him the training camp star. It's not that he's catching passes he didn't necessarily catch before, because I'll admit, I mean, his hands are nice, but he's still dropping balls every now and then. It's the moveset and the athleticism and speed we're seeing from somebody his size that we expected years ago that we're finally getting to see. His hands and his catching ability aren't going to blow you away. He's not Michael Thomas. He's still going to catch between 60-65%, but he's not Michael Thomas. But even with that, it's the ability to form separation that he's showing that's really impressing everybody.
The running narrative for Coleman, at least in my mind, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, the running narrative on Coleman for the past 3, maybe 4 training camps is he just absolutely he blows people away in training camp, and then once the season starts.
Okay.
Well, Sean Payton said last year he had a pedestrian camp, so I don't know if that's exactly blowing people away. I think that's just a misconception because most Saints fans see our players as everybody's a training camp star, and then the season, because you're 7-9, everybody sucks. But that's not true. I mean, a lot of things have to come together for you to win. And I honestly thought Brandon Coleman had a really good season last year, considering his opportunities, the targets he got. I thought he showed improvement. But until Saints fans see a statistical stat line that shows him being better than average, they're not going to believe it. So.
Yeah,
true. I agree completely.
I absolutely agree with that too, because it seems like that people are always trying to write him off the roster to get someone, whoever the training camp darling is this year or previous years, to take his place, because they think they can always get an upgrade because he was not Marcus Colston 2.0. Yeah. And like you said, there's only 2 places he can play. He either plays at X or split end position that Michael Thomas has, or he becomes that 4th receiver, because he's not the guy that's going to stretch the defense and run the clear-out routes to open up things underneath. He's your guy who's going to move the chains. He's your guy who is going to be the red zone threat. He's that guy who's going to go over the middle. And that's kind of what his role is in this offense.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And sure, there will be sub packages Sean Payton brings in where Coleman and Thomas see the field a lot together. One team they did that against a lot last year was the Atlanta Falcons. They brought in both big bodies to take on those corners that Atlanta had, and it was successful. I mean, Coleman had a good game, Thomas had a good game, but you can't do that every play. I mean, you can't do that every game. You're going to get schemed against. There are deficiencies for a receiver his size trying to run positions made for smaller receivers like slot and flanker. But what he can do as the fourth guy, I think, is undersold a lot.
I think
so. If we say,
I'm sorry. I think that the point that Deuce made a while ago is very appropriate. Going into the season last year, he kind of faded from the front of the pack, so to speak. Towards the end of the season, he made a drastic improvement. He wasn't missing balls. He was, for lack of a better way of putting it, maybe he was the go-to receiver in situations for Drew Brees, and he delivered in that capacity. So I think the opportunity is there. It's just going to be for him to reach out and take hold of it.
I was going to add, Deuce, for the sake of argument, that the top four receivers are Thomas, Snead. I see the Saints keeping five receivers. Who do you see coming out of this fifth receiving spot that could possibly make a move and have a role on the Saints roster this year?
Man, I think that's one of those questions that 2 weeks in a training camp, any answer I give you is both right and wrong because it's going to change.
Yeah.
I mean, the very first week of camp, Corey Fuller came in looking like he was an all-pro, and he's kind of fizzled and hasn't seen a lot of the field. He's getting beat up like everybody else. Tommy Lee Lewis in the past couple of days has shown that, look, I'm not just a return guy. I'm a deep threat receiver, and the Saints love that. And then you got Travon Durrell, the UDFA, who is obviously the hometown favorite. Everybody's pushing for him. And all three of them are having good camps. I mean, so there's nothing that you can peg down after 2 weeks and say this guy is the fifth guy. I mean, if I had to lean one way, I would say Tommy Lee Lewis because of his familiarity with the offense. I think that gives him a big leg up. And even though his kick and punt return duties have taken a back seat to guys like Ted Ginn and Kamara, the fact that he's multifaceted means he's probably got a better chance of making this roster than any other receiver currently fighting for the fifth spot.
That's kind of where I'm, I think the fifth receiver is going to either be the guy who's going to be inactive on game day or a guy who's got to play special teams as well as be a receiver for the Saints. So, I think that's the battle's going to sort itself out in training camp and even in the preseason games, and we may not really know until week one who's the guy who's going to be that fifth receiver. Let's kick over to the running backs. I know you're a big Ingram fan, but let's talk a little about Adrian Peterson because the depth chart, that whatever it's worth, that came out lists Ingram and Peterson as 1 and 1A as the starters. How do you see this playing out?
I'll be honest, I find that listing very accurate, especially if you look at how the Saints have run their roster the past few years. Look at last year. Mark Ingram had statistically, in terms of where he ranked among his peers, one of the best backs in the NFL. I'm not just throwing that out there. He was third in elusivity rating in terms of how he did yards after contact, 5.1 yards a carry, averaged 7 yards a carry in the right B gap. I mean, the things he did put him at the top. I mean, one stat that really boggles most people's mind, in the past 3 years, no running back in the NFL has a better catch rating or drop rating over the past 3 years, even Le'Veon Bell. And that just blows people's minds. And now I think we still, though, would say Mark Ingram and Tim Hightower fought for the starting spot last year, even after all those accolades. That's Sean Payton's offense. I see Ingram getting between 200 and 225 carries and Adrian Peterson getting between 125 and 150, depending on how much they run. I think you're going to see a 1-2 punch. I have yet to see the burst from Peterson that made him the Hall of Famer, but I've seen a lot of good that shows he can still run. So I still see him being that guy that they're going to definitely use the end zone for his power because he's definitely got a lot more power than Mark Ingram does for goal line type situations. And I think they're going to use him as a 1-2 punch. I don't think there's a starter that you can say this guy gets 300 carries because that just doesn't happen in New Orleans.
I completely agree. I predicted about 10 carries a game over 16 games. That's 160 carries for Peterson. And people look at me like you're crazy. I'm like, well, if you look at Hightower, he had 133, I think, last year. So, 160 is not outrageous for this. And the big thing, I think, for Peterson will be for the Saints to build that early lead like they did in 2009. And then you have, like how they use Mike Bell, you have an Adrian Peterson on fresh legs coming to pound that defense late in the third, early in the fourth quarter when the Saints are trying to preserve a lead and run some clock. So that would be an ideal situation for me as far as a Saints season.
For him is going to be situational. Like, for example, I see him playing a lot against Minnesota because Peyton loves the revenge card. But then again, I don't think Adrian Peterson is a great matchup against teams like Atlanta. A game like Atlanta, I assume there's going to be a shootout. I don't want Adrian Peterson running the first quarter 10 times and sucking up my clock because I feel like I'm going to be down 2 touchdowns. In that case, I want Kamara and Ingram, and I want Peterson to probably see 10 snaps. And that isn't because I don't like him. It's just a fit thing. So I think you're going to see games where he could very well come out against Minnesota and run 15, 20 times, and everybody jumps on the bandwagon immediately on every network, ESPN, NFL.com. He's the designated starter. You're going to see him run 300 carries. He's back to his old self. And then the next 2 games against, the Patriots, you're going to barely see him at all. So I think that's just how the season's going to go for them. They're going to flip-flop to whatever the best matchup, and hopefully they're successful.
I totally agree with that. Totally agree with that scenario.
Made me.
Well, go ahead, Sean.
You just made mention of the wild card in the whole running back core. How do you see, as Adrian Peterson, the AK-41, how do you see Alvin Kamara's role not only through the course of the season, how do you see it beginning and progressing during the course of the season?
Well, there was a website, I think it's Number Fire. They came out with their predictions for the team and what each player would do. And they had Kamara with 18 receptions this year. And it just called me aback. I see Kamara getting between 50 and 70 receptions this year. I really do. Now, in the same regard, I only see him getting probably 50 carries. And I made this comment to Nick Underhill, talking to him privately the other day. After going back and watching Alvin Kamara's film from last year, really putting good study into it, not just study preparing for the draft where you have to study 30 running backs or 50 running backs, but just him. I feel like he's going to push Mark Ingram for the starting spot within 2 years. I really do. Assuming he pans out to potential and how he looks. I mean, he can come out and be the next Ryan Lee for running backs, but if he looks how he's done in preseason and on tape, he could push as a starter. I mean, people don't realize he is 220 pounds, which is a little bit bigger than Ingram. He is a large back with the athleticism in terms of wheel routes and slant routes and stuff that Darren Sproles showed us. He could really be that guy. But this year, behind the 3-headed monster or being the last head of that, the tail, I see him being more an impact in the receiving game and then getting a lot of draw plays between the 20s. I don't see him getting a lot of red zone use, but I see him between the 20s, third downs, things like that, running draws up the middle that go for 20 yards, like we saw Darren Sproles do in 2011. Things like that is where he's going to be successful.
Sure. Okay, shift gears just a little bit. Let me ask you this. For the past several seasons, the Saints, it's been Drew Brees, Luke McCown, and then whatever. Which in this case has been Garrett Grayson. This year going into camp, McCown's gone, Dallas. You've got Drew Brees, Chase Daniel, still have hanging by a very thin thread, Garrett Grayson, but we also have Ryan Nassib into the mix. How do you see this playing out? What quarterbacks do you see the Saints keeping on the 53-man roster, possibly training camp, possibly road spot, and also kick into the curb? How do you see that playing out?
Well, I think you're going to keep Drew Brees. I think that's a given. I think Chase Daniels is a given. And it depends on how Garrett Grayson does. As much as I like Nassib as that kind of underdog story, his throwing motion is really weird looking. He just needs a lot of Coach Lombardi time. I don't think he's ready to see any type of NFL. Anything that I've seen in training camp wouldn't lead me to believe that. Garrett Grayson is word of mouth right now, looks to have improved from last year. So what's going to come down to it, and Coach Payton said that they're going to give Grayson an ability to run this offense. And when he's talking about that, means he's going to give them the ones in preseason. If Garrett Grayson shows he's able to handle it, the Saints might carry 3 quarterbacks because they want to protect him. If he shows no improvement over the past couple of years, they might just let him go, stick with Chase Daniels, and then draft something in the next year or so.
Alan?
Yeah, I'm definitely of the opinion that I think just because of injuries and need of depth at certain positions, there were 2 quarterbacks. I would not be surprised, however, to see Grayson end up in the practice squad again. And if they feel like he could get signed away, then they'll make a move to try and put him back on the active roster if he shows significant improvement in the preseason. But the big thing is right now, I think just purely for injury-related depth, they're going to need to have they're going to need to save that roster spot for, say, a backup center, maybe a defensive end, maybe a defensive tackle. We'll see how this plays out. I'm going to do a mock way too early 53 roster tomorrow before the preseason game. And with the caveat that this will change, and I know it's going to change over the next 4 weeks. Injuries obviously going to have to influence that. But I'm just going to give you an idea of who I think is probably in the lead in the clubhouse, and these are the guys you need to watch to see if they can overtake who I think is in the lead. And like we said, with the wide receiver position. Let's see how Tommy Lee Lewis and Corey Fuller, for example, battle it out. And you can't discount Williams Lambert and Lampman. You know, Lampman showed a lot of stuff on special teams. And I think in the running back position, what we were talking about earlier, you know, there's a battle right now for Lasco and Darius, I can't think of the name of that running back we just brought in.
Victor Butler.
Victor Butler. Thank you. Victor Butler. Yeah.
Look, I'm not here, but Travaris Cadet is there and strong right now.
Really?
I don't want to talk. Nobody wants to talk about
I'm one of those people that kind of has written off Cadet because I think Kamara's got a lot of his same skills and plays out.
I'd agree, but there's a reason Cadet has lasted how he has. He's kind of like when everybody wanted to know, why is Robert Meacham still on this team? Cadet is a great blocker. And Cadet is a reliable receiver. He's not great, but he's reliable. And unless Lasco can usurp him, I think Cadet might sneak on this roster. I know everybody's going to hate to hear that. And as far as Butler goes, he's been a great story for 2 weeks. But as of right now, I have him nowhere near sniffing the 53. He's got to go a long way before he even thinks about the real roster.
Right, exactly. He is going to have one of those runs, I think, in one of these preseason games, probably the 4th preseason game, where people are like, oh, my God, look at this. This is the next – he's like a miniature version of Ironhead Hayward, you know, because he's going to run over somebody. And then when the Saints release him, they're going to go, look, this is typical Loomis, typical Peyton. They let this guy go, you know, and he'll end up with Atlanta or Carolina or go to some place and become a star, just like they got rid of Chris Ivory, just like they get rid of anybody who's any good on this team, blah, 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 you know the drill. And I just think he's going to be a fun back to watch this preseason. I think Lasco, I do agree, I think Lasco is hanging on by a thread. I think they keep 4 running backs, but you said Cadet could easily push him off the roster. Lasco could hold on. It could be somebody coming on the roster. We don't even know yet. This is how this team operates when it comes to that 4th guy. Last thing on the offense before we switch over to the defense, the offensive line. We haven't talked a whole heck of a lot about it outside of the inability to snap the shotgun. We really don't, but you think about it, we really don't hear much about Pete. We don't hear much about the whole right side of the offensive line, whether it's Warford or Streif. Yeah, we hear very little about it. We talk. The only reason why we talk about the left tackle is because Armstead is out, and then when Ramczyk didn't play practice for a couple of days. So give us your impressions of the offensive line, Deuce. What do you think our strengths are? Where are your concerns?
I think my concern is that left tackle spot, which doesn't have a designated starter right now. But
yeah,
in training camp, you're not going to see a ton from your offensive line. It's one of those things that's not really full contact yet. I mean, you're not trying to kill each other in the trenches. It's the defensive line realizes they can't go full speed because if they touch Drew Brees, they're in trouble. And that doesn't mean they're not putting forth full effort. But there is a difference between you practicing at full speed and you in an NFL game at full speed.
No Oklahoma drills anymore.
As far as guys like Warford and Pete, I'm very confident in. I mean, there's no reason to not be so far. Zach Streif, if he can stay the ageless wonder, like I said, no worries so far. He's getting beat by Cameron Jordan, but that's also Cameron Jordan. I mean, you can't knock Pete for that. And then the left tackle is the only real concern. Now, center, I'm not worried about because reports say Unger will be back be either the last preseason game or week 1. So if he's able to slide right back in, I'm not too worried. If he's not, I'm extremely worried because center has not looked good in training camp for anybody, whether it be injuries like Cameron Tom or Jack Allen throwing snaps above people's heads. Laribius, butchered his name, doing the same thing. Nothing's looked good at center. And then left tackle is Khalif Barnes, who I did a kind of a gauge on Twitter. Nobody's got confidence in Khalif Barnes. And then Ramczyk, I mean, he's looked okay, but he needs more snaps at left tackle. So I'm not really worried. I don't get worried about anything 2 weeks in unless I see an actual doctor's report saying this guy is missing so-and-so amount of time. So I think the offensive line is still a strength. Don't worry about it, fans. Don't freak out. If we're 2 weeks into this, 2 more weeks into this, and it's still the same, okay. Grab your britches. It might be bad, but right now it's fine.
When it comes to the offensive line, there are 2 narratives that concern me. And I don't think I'm out of turn here to say that I saw you engaged earlier on Twitter earlier in the day today in regards to this. I don't remember exactly who it was with, but
it was on my buddy Ralph.
No, I think it was our buddy Andrew and Sean.
So there's probably a lot of them. I was. It's been an active week.
The concern. there's the concern that you have a rookie offensive lineman. Obviously, that's a concern coming out of the gate. But you have him having to step in for a potential All-Pro player in Teron Armstead, and he's missing snaps in practice for an undisclosed reason. Do you see that as being a major concern or not so much?
Look, I'd say not so much right now. I mean, personal opinion, I know a lot of people, and they are entitled to their opinion. But if your hot take right now, 2 weeks in, is the world has fallen and we've literally not seen a team play a snap of real football yet, I ain't got time for that. I mean, obviously I do because I love debating on Twitter. So I do have time for it, but it's ridiculous to me.
You're better than me at that. I agree with you, Deuce. I am not worried about the offensive line. I'm concerned, but I'm not worried.
I mean, do I want to run Armstead right now? Yeah, of course I do. But
sure,
I don't have Von Miller coming after Drew Brees tomorrow. I mean, I feel like I have time to prepare for that. And I'm not. Nothing is scaring me at the moment.
I was more concerned about the off. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Me personally, I look at it this way: it's not exactly the greatest position to be in, having Drew Brees blindside protected, so to speak, by a rookie left tackle. But you have Ramczyk moving to the left side in the position that he played in college. So that takes part of that blow away. having that concern, I don't know. I think he needs to be in there, but at the same time, last year at this time, everybody was talking about how badly Drew Brees was going to get mangled when the season started. And I don't think I'm out of line by saying that offensive line unit performed maybe best of any individual unit on your side of the ball for the New Orleans Saints last year.
Well, I think what a lot of people have to keep in mind is Drew Brees gets the ball out very quickly. Andres Pete, who's now your starting left guard, looked strong at left. I mean, people forget Pete spent more time at left tackle than he did left guard. I mean, yeah, he's the left guard. That's where I want him. But how many times do you remember Drew Brees just getting destroyed from his blind side with Andres Pete there? Because to me, if worse comes to worse, if Barnes doesn't look strong in preseason and Ramczyk is not ready to go, Pete's simply going to slide to the left tackle spot and Cinio's going to take the guard. I mean, that seems like the logical order of operations there. And I don't think there's a lot to worry. I mean, if Unger really now if we're 2 weeks from the season, 1 week from the season, and Unger's not coming back like he's supposed to, and Ramczyk is, falling off the face of the earth, then I worry because I don't have a true starter. I've got a sub. But Pete is a starter at either left position. Unger is a starter at center. Cinio has shown he can be a serviceable starting guard, even though he's not the best option. I'm not worried. This all kind of hinges on Unger, though. If Unger doesn't really come back by the season and Ramczyk's not there to left tackle, then I do worry because the center is the most important position on the offensive line. But at the moment, like I said, guys, I can't worry. I mean, I sit here, nothing is telling me, hey, look, the Saints are going 6-10, all because this guy's injured. I just don't have that feeling. It's
sure.
I've gone through too many bad Saints teams to have that kind of feeling. I've seen a lot worse. I mean, go back to the Mike Dickey years, and that was a lot worse.
Last thing on that, even if you don't want to take my confidence for it, think of last year. Last year, even everyone, myself included, said that this offensive line coming in was a weakness. And it ended up being one of the highest-ranked offensive lines in the NFL. I think in run blocking, they were 6th overall. I mean, so with that in mind, it's obviously not as big of a deficiency as we are being led to believe.
Yep, and the coaching staff has shown they can overcome weaknesses in the offensive line. They know what to do. And like you said, Drew Brees gets rid of the ball so quickly that, I'm not concerned about that. Well, let's talk about the other side. Let's talk about the defensive line. You've got Cameron Jordan. You've got Cameron Jordan. You've got Rankins. And then you've got some question marks. You've got Davidson and Onyemata, who are taking turns alternating, playing next to Rankins. And then you've got let's make a deal. What's behind door number 1, 2, and 3 for defensive end? How do you see this playing out?
Oh, that's another one of those ones I get to easily deflect by saying, hey, we're 2 weeks in, and we haven't got to see anybody play yet. Okafor and Kikaha are your obvious 2 choices there. I mean, Trey Hendrickson has missed a little bit of time lately, so it's mostly between those 2. And on paper, in reports, everybody from the media, everybody you'll talk to who's at camp, those 2 players look good. But until we see them rushing a quarterback not named Drew Brees, somebody they're actually allowed to hit, I don't know. I think the defensive end position opposite Cam Jordan will probably be a rotational thing for multiple players all year long. That doesn't mean I'm not confident. That doesn't mean I am confident. It means I literally don't know because it's been 2 weeks, guys. Stop making conclusions. Not you two, but don't make conclusions already. I mean, give this team time to work it out.
Yep, I totally agree. How about Onyemata, though? How do you feel he's progressing? He sounds like, at least in the first week or so of camp, it sounded like he was having a much improved camp, that he seems to be ready to take that next step. And then it's kind of fallen off a little bit in the second week. So how do you see this guy playing out?
Well, I think that's just kind of how the rumor mill plays out. I don't necessarily know if that is really him falling off as much because if we're being fair, Brandon Coleman's hype train is still going strong, but he hasn't looked as impressive, quote unquote, in the past 2 practices as he did before. He's dropped more passes.
Yeah.
I mean, defense, the secondary really stepped up their coverage and has improved. That doesn't mean Coleman regressed. So I think a lot of it is just who's he facing in those one-on-one matchups. I mean, I like Onyemata as a backup 3-tech or a rotational guy along the D-line, but what are we expecting there? Is somebody really expecting him to be a 3-down starter and trying to see that kind of performance? I mean, he's always been the flash guy with potential because he doesn't have a lot of football experience. He's still learning the game. He's a very raw talent who doesn't have a lot of moves. So, yeah, he's going to flash when one of his moves works, but it's that transition of, okay, the move didn't work. What do I do now that he hasn't figured out yet? He doesn't know, let's translate to this or transition to this. He's still trying to do that one trick. I mean, if the bull rush doesn't work, what do I do? If the spin don't work, what do I do? He's got a lot of work to do. And that doesn't mean I'm not confident in him. But I think if people are expecting him to show consistency every practice, that's not his player profile. He's shown he needs to learn the game still.
And who do you see possibly coming in as that fourth defensive tackle now? Because you got Davidson and Rankins, but you obviously need another guy to come in to play, for lack of a better term, the nose tackle, the guy to back up Davidson mainly.
In terms of backing up Davidson, I really don't know if there is anybody at the one tick. I think Mitchell Lavin, which is a German name, so it's not Lowen, it's Lavin. Mitchell Lavin is Nick Underhill's dark horse to make the roster. Zimmer, who is the guy we picked out of Buffalo's practice squad, have both made a bit of a push there. Now, both of those guys are larger guys that you would expect to play that one technique type of a role, but they've shown the ability to pass rush at times. So I think along the Saints defensive line, for example, on my unofficial 53-man roster, I've only got 3 defensive tackles who I call true defensive tackles. And that's because I've got about 600 defensive ends on my roster. We just don't have any – how our team is, we have players that play everything and are masters of nothing. We have a lot of jack-of-all-trade players along our defensive line right now, with the exception being 2 people. That's Rankins and Jordan. Jordan is the prototypical defensive end along that right side. Sheldon Rankins is a prototypical 3 technique. Everybody else is kind of a little bit of everything. So,
yeah.
People said when Fairley went down that it was going to be such a blow and such a detriment to the defensive unit, and both Alan and I believe, agreed on this. And I kind of took umbrage in the way that I felt from the comments that I heard Alan make, that it was brought in here basically to be a bridge from one point to another. Mm-hmm. He wasn't ever brought in to be the future. You drafted Sheldon Rankins in the first round. You didn't draft him to sit him on the bench. And Fairley was supposed to be that bridge between what is and what was going to be with Sheldon Rankins. And I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't see Nick Fairley being lost as nearly the blow that everyone seems to be saying that it is, because you have Sheldon Rankins, you have David Onyemata, which coming into New Orleans was absolutely the very walking epitome of being raw talent. Everything that he has is based on pure force. He had absolutely no finesse to go with it. And he had a year of the off season, a year coaching to see what he can bring to the table. Now, I don't see how Fairley going down is going to defense nearly the way that everyone seems to believe that it is.
Well, I think it's about time that we start that segment called "The Guest Disagrees with the Host," and I have to I can't float on that, because even though he's a bridge, and he was intended as a bridge, he was a strong, concrete, withstand the mighty rushing Mississippi River bridge. He was consistent and effective in every facet of the game at that 3-tech position. He was rushing the passer very well all year. He had a couple of down games, like when his mother died, things like that, but he was defending against the run well all year long. He finished as one of the best defensive tackles at his position in the entire league. Sure. Sheldon Rankins, while I like what he can become, Sheldon Rankins was not near as good against the run, which is very important for a 3-down starter. And he didn't show the finesse of a pass rusher, even though he had success. He wasn't as good as Fairley. So he would have to take a very, very big step up to match Fairley last year. So just from that standpoint, yeah, there's potential, but losing Fairley is still huge. Just because you have somebody ready in the wings doesn't make the loss any less painful, because that guy is not that same level. Yes. Now, if Sheldon Rankins comes out and proves me wrong and becomes the next Aaron Donald, praise the Lord Jesus. But as of now, there's nothing to lead me to believe that's how things are. Right now, I simply see Nick Fairley, our probably second best defensive player from last year, is out for the season, and I'm relying on a guy who has not been a full-time starter.
You know, I can agree with both of y'all in this regard. I mean, in this statement, because this is how I saw Fairley, and I totally agree with what you had to say there, Deuce. I think Fairley was effective in what he was asked to do with the Saints. He would be more effective in that rotational role, and I think that's what the Saints had envisioned for him. He would rotate a lot with Rankins to keep both of them fresh, and then there were packages where both of them would be out there playing, like sort of like that NASCAR package, pass rushing package they've done in the past. Having Fairley out there has put a lot more on Rankins' plate, as far as not only do you have to a first-round draft pick, you've got to also pick up the slack for a guy who was probably one of the best defensive tackles in the league last year. So that's a lot to ask of this guy. Where Onyemata has to fit in. That, of course, is where the other defensive end, whether it be Okafor, Kihaka, even Hendrickson, has to come in and take some of that burden now off of Rankins to try and supplement or replace the production that Fairley gave you last year. So yeah, it affects the entire defensive line in my opinion. So both of y'all in that.
Well, I mean, it's better than I think it's better than if Cameron Jordan had gone down, because there's nobody behind him. I mean, I don't trust Kikaha to run that.
Exactly.
Yeah, you have Rankins there, but what you're doing is you're asking Rankins to elevate his play a lot. And I'm not trying to be mean there, but what Fairley was able to do, Rankins couldn't sniff at. Now, when they're on the field together with him and Cam, yeah, that line was very effective. But in terms of being the 3-down starter, Fairley Rankins was not at that level yet. And he might do that this year. But on just looking at it in terms of black and white, it's a big loss. That doesn't mean there's not potential for that to not affect us that much, but it's still a huge loss.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
well, now, in my defense, I would like to say that I take absolutely nothing away from Nick Fairley. And
you can't backtrack now, Sean.
No. I'm just explaining the very small area that I'm standing on as it crumbles away. I take absolutely nothing away from Nick Fairley. And in my estimation, and I believe if you go back and search through the old shows, Nick Fairley was my choice for Defensive Player of the Year last year for the New Orleans Saints. I take nothing at all away from the contribution he made to this team a year ago. I just believe that there is going to be a I don't even know the word I'm looking for. When it comes to Sheldon Rankins and David Onyemata and Trey Hendricks and these other guys, I believe they're going to step up and realize that there's room there that they're going to have to make up for in their approach to the game, to make up for the lack of it fairly. And they're going to have to for this whole thing to work out.
Well, we're talking about, the defense being a jack of all trades, master of none. That's a perfect transition to the other guys who have to help out this defensive line, linebacking core. How do you see this linebacking core shake out? Because it seems like we've got good at one thing, but not a guy who's good at everything. And we've got guys that we're going to try and put all over the field in a distance situation.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of explaining it. If you could take Alex Anzalone, Stephon Anthony, and Manti Te'o and combine those three players, you'd have Luke Kuechly. And I think that's the trouble is, as you said, there is something that each of these players does really well. For example, Manti Te'o is really good at defending the flats and the short passing situations. He's really bad at tackling because he tackles high and he's inconsistent there. Stephon Anthony, as of the past 2 years of film study I've done on him, the dude wouldn't recognize, a Bugatti driving behind him because he has no peripherals and no real realization of what's going on. Zones are not his friend. But when it comes to attacking something in front of him, I don't want to be that guy because he's going to hurt me. And then you've got Alex Anzalone, who the dude has got the speed to go from sideline to sidelines, but you got to wonder, is he going to hit his target? So I think all these guys have got potential, and Mike Nolan is the real variable there. Is he going to be able to finally mold these guys into a cohesive unit? There's only been one player out of the entire linebacking group that has seemed to be consistent in 2 weeks of training camp, and that is A.J. Klein as the starting Sam backer. We've seen Craig Robertson be the starting middle linebacker and the starting Will. We've seen Stephon Anthony be the third middle linebacker and the starting Will. I mean, we've seen rotation everywhere. And I think at this point, I know as much about as the New Orleans Saints coaches do on who's going to be the starter come week one. It's a very open in the air process.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it's going to be one of those things where you're going to see, just like the receiving corps, you're going to see guys shuttle in and out, depending on the down and distance, depending on the opponent, depending on the situation in the game. I happen to think that Anthony found a home as the Will. I think it seems to be it appeals to his athleticism, his go get him. That's all you got to do. Just go get him.
Yeah.
And
a lot less coverage at the Will spot.
Exactly. And Klein, Sam seems to be a good fit there, too. It's that middle linebacker, Manti Te'o, Robertson, rookie fit in this. Does he play the weak side sometimes? Does he play the strong side? I think there's going to be a lot of shuffling all season long in that position.
Let me ask you both this, because I respect both of your opinions. You guys, and let me preface this by saying I've gotten a lot of questions during the course of the week on this. Do you guys believe, as I do, that Nolan is going to be the last gasp for Stephon Anthony? In other words, is Nolan going to be the last chance that Anthony has to stick to this roster, or will it be, this is your chance, you blew it, goodbye?
It's hard to say. I mean, if he can't play the Will, he's pretty much run out of positions to play because they're not going to go to a 34 defense. They're not going to go to a pure 34. So, I mean, I do kind of see this is it for Anthony, but on the plus side, I think he is starting to get that. He seems to play better. We'll see what happens in the preseason. Deuce, how do you see this?
Like I said, preseason, I went through after the end of last season, did a pretty exhaustive film study on Stephon Anthony, detailing what he does well and why he struggles under Dennis Allen, whereas under Rob Ryan, it wasn't that much of a struggle. I mean, he definitely struggled in coverage, but he wasn't asked to do it as much as Anthony's going to ask his middle linebacker. But it's just one of those things. Look, Mike Nolan, if he can work miracles, great. I think the Will spot, like you said, is the last spot he really has a chance at. His athleticism would seem to indicate he could do it, but he's still going to have to cover. I mean, you can't get away from it. I mean, he's still going to have to defend running backs in the flat. He's still going to have to watch out for those slot receivers crossing over the middle. I mean, he's still going to have to drop back in intermediate zones and cover sixes. I mean, there's no way to get around it. And if he can't do that, he's going to be done.
Yeah.
Good enough.
Exactly. You can't hide.
Let me ask you this. You've done exhaustive film study on all these guys, and you do such a fantastic job on what you do with those film studies. Who do you see as being maybe the two rookies that have the opportunity to make an impact on this defense in the coming season.
Alan, you want to go first?
Oh well, okay. I think on defense, I think it's secondary. I think it's Marshawn Lattimore and I think I think both of those guys not only have the best opportunity to have the biggest impact in defense. I would not be surprised to see both those guys as starters. I think Williams has shown the ball hawking skills that Sean Payton's been looking for since Darren Sharper was playing in the secondary. And I think you drafted Marshawn Lattimore as your number one guy. You want him out there as your number one guy, and you're going to try and put him out there and see if he can do it. You know, the injury, yeah, that's a concern. You know, the tweak of the knee, but he's already back out there. You know, it's not like a Jarius Byrd injury where he sort of disappeared and no one knows where he is. He's just not in camp and no one's talking about him. He's there. We see him at practice. We see him running individual drills. He's just not in there for team drills. And I think that they are trusting and going to rely on him a lot to come in on. And let's see how you do out there, rookie. How do you feel, Deuce?
Well, I think Marshawn Lattimore is my favorite pick defensively, and I think his potential is the greatest. But I think the one who have the most immediate impact is definitely going to be Marcus Williams. Finally giving us the free safety on paper that we always wanted in Jarius Byrd. And I'm one of the few guys who doesn't knock Jarius Byrd into the dirt because there was injuries, there was scheme problems. There was also the fact that Jarius Byrd didn't have the front four that he had in Buffalo that made him so successful.
Absolutely.
So I think Williams is the guy to watch there. And I think Williams is one of the players. He can be good this year regardless of how the rest of the team is, whereas Lattimore cannot. I mean, if Lattimore's bad at corner, he's just going to be bad at corner, where the free safety spot we've had, Marcus Williams, even at his worst, is probably an upgrade of what we had. And that's not knocking Von Bell, but Von Bell was best in the box. His score as a free safety in terms of coverage was very, very poor. And, yeah, he can improve that. But he was stellar in the box. When I tell you he was good in the box. Mm-hmm. So if you move Bell more to a strong safety type role and then make KV the roamer, which is what he's supposed to be anyway, Marcus Williams can now be the free safety and gives you an immediate upgrade. Whereas Lattimore, he might come in and be slow, and then I would trust Devontae Harris or Sterling Moore, and it's not as pressing with him or he's not able to do as much, even though I think he's the best pick.
I totally agree with that. I think, people are concerned because P.J. Williams missed a practice. They're concerned that, Bro has missed a lot of practice. You have the injury to Lattimore. But I think this year, and because of what they went through last year, and some of that depth didn't have last year because Ken Crawley said now the game is slowing down for him. He's making plays because he understands the defense. He understands what the offense is trying to do to him. So he's anticipating a lot better. Sterling Moore is a pro. He knows his job. Harris has even stepped up a little bit in these practices. So I think in preseason, if we don't see a lot of Lattimore and we don't see a lot of Bro, it's concerning. But if we see improvement in these preseason games by the Ken Crawleys, by the Sterling Moores, by the Devontae Harris, or even Arthur Millette, who we haven't talked much about either, I think that's a good thing for the secondary because guys who can come in and play. We need to get Bro and don't get me wrong, we need to get Bro and Lattimore and P.J. Williams out there, but we need to have guys that the drop off isn't here to here; it's like here.
I agree completely. That's the thing that when people ask me about defensive backfield, I tell them, you got Bro up here and you got Lattimore here. Well, when you drop down to Ken Crawley and Sterling Moore, you're going from way up here to way down here. There's such a steep drop off there. That's what's concerning. It's not depth so much as the dropping quality in the depth.
You're going to give up the yards. You are going to give up yards. The key is, and I last week, and I'll beat it again this week, the key is turnovers. Can you get the turnovers? Can you pick off passes in the end zone? Can you stop drives and get your offense back on the field? If we can get cornerbacks who can make interceptions, that's going to help out a heck of a lot more than getting more sacks, than being one of the best teams in the league to stop the run, because that is the way this team is built. To me, that's how you win football games, is win the turnover battle, be plus 10, plus 11 in turnover battle like the Kansas City Chiefs are, like Atlanta was last year. Defense will be good enough to win ball games for you because you're stealing possessions, you're taking what could be an easy 7-point and flipping to a 14-point lead for yourself. That, I mean, is that how you see this defense?
I think one of the things that really doesn't get talked about enough is the fact that the Saints lost so many games by such close scores.
Absolutely.
Not just on the defense, but special teams. I mean, they really weren't that far from being a winning football team. That I still don't believe, even if they had get into the playoffs, that they were anywhere in the same level as the playoff teams like the Packers and the Falcons. No chance there. But I still think that they were a good, talented football team that lost, if I remember correctly, a total of 300-plus games due to injury combined through all their players, an insanely high number. So overall, it's just getting these guys healthy and letting them actually get reps with each other. I mean, we saw the defense look so good about halfway into the year last year when guys like Ellerby came back and, Rakins was able to come back, and there was actually a halfway healthy defense. Now, they didn't last towards the end, but I don't expect almost any defense to stop the Falcons. Like I said, I really need to see this team gel. Like you brought up Ken Crawley. I mean, Ken Crawley to me has got to show he's consistent. Ken Crawley held Julio Jones to his lowest rating and lowest performance of the year, of his whole year last year. 1 catch on 5 targets, 16 yards, and he actually went 1 for 7 when you add in the other corners. And Ken Crawley did that with all solo coverages, no safety help except on the 1 catch. So every time he was solo, he stopped Julio Jones. 3 of those were in the end zone. And then he would go in and do the exact opposite against less talented wide receivers. So if he could just, work on his consistency, keep in mind he was a rookie UDFA, but you saw the potential there. You saw what could be. And I think you've seen that a lot with the New Orleans Saints, but the only way for that to turn into anything for any team in the NFL is teams that are able to actually work together, build cohesion, and that only comes when you're able to stay healthy. So if they're healthy, I see this team winning 9, 10 games. If they're not healthy, well, then we're probably going to see the end of the Drew Brees, Sean Payton era.
Good point.
Well, we talked. You touched on special teams a little bit, and go straight to the heart of the matter with this: the new coaches, the new special teams coach, the new defensive line coach. And we talked a little bit. Mike Nolan, the return of CJ. What impact have you seen these new coaches have with this team?
Well, it's tough. I mean, I want to jump on that bandwagon, but I've also got to feel like I have to play the journalist / scout role, where you're kind of even keel. For example, I could very easily try to attribute Brandon Coleman coming out and being more aggressive and looking more on fire due to Curtis Johnson coming in, or Stephon Anthony looking competent at the wheel linebacker due to Mike Nolan. But in all honesty, you can't really judge their performance until the regular season starts, and then you're able to see it on the field. Do I like the hype and the enthusiasm and the fire that we're seeing from these new coaches? Yeah, I love it. Haven't seen it in years in training camp. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate. Passion does not always translate to performance. So once I see the performance aspect added to the passion, then I'll give it my thumbs up.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I love the enthusiasm, the things I see on Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, about how hard they're hitting, so on and so forth. I love that. And I think that's something that's long do that we didn't see from the Greenbrier. It's all going to start day after tomorrow in Cleveland. We're going, as great as the vibe is, if they Metairie, so on and so forth, it's not going to make very much difference at all unless we see it on the field in Cleveland, unless we see it on the field in Minnesota, unless we see it on Florida against they're going to have to find a way to take all of this pointed out, these advantages that they have. Unless they find a way to take that out there on the field and produce, it's not going to make a bit of difference.
Hey, we got Smoke J. Cutler maybe playing against it in in London, so that's a good way for us to pad our turnover stats. I'm looking forward to that.
The meme that you posted the other day about of Jay Cutler smoking a cigarette, talking about hey Gase, how many have I completed? And he says 3 to the linebackers, 2 to the defensive backfield. Doesn't matter, I completed them.
Yeah.
That made man.
I tell you, I'm enjoying these Smoking Jay Cutler memes back. Well, Deuce, season game in 2 years. I think we're 0-8 over the past 2 years. How do you see this preseason game shaking out? Not that it matters, but how do you see it shaking out? Do you think they kind of have to win a couple preseason games to kind of build confidence on this team?
Well, let me say this. Everybody remembers that famous Detroit Lions team that never won a regular season game, right? Can anybody tell me what they did in the preseason?
They went undefeated.
Yeah, they went undefeated.
I do remember that.
So preseason games don't mean jack squat. You have 90 players trying to make the roster. All I'm looking for is effectiveness. If you run the ball efficiently, I mean, if you get blocks, I don't care what the score is. We could get beat by the Browns 60-7. But if my first 2 teams came in and looked amazing and then the fourth team in the fourth quarter gave up 30 points, I don't care. All I care about is how the players look.
Yeah.
It's still going to stink, buddy.
I mean, nobody wants to see their team lose, of course, but it doesn't matter in the scheme of things because if it mattered, the Detroit Lions should have gone undefeated that year. So,
right. Yeah. You know, my big thing is, and a lot of people remember this. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sean. Well, I was going to say, a lot of people remember in 2009, the Saints came out and just tore apart Oakland. And yes, that's Jamarcus Russell era Oakland Raiders. It's not like you playing against David Carr. But I think in that 2009 game, we saw what we were getting ready to see in the regular season. So to me, the only preseason game I'm even remotely really concerned about is that third one when your starters are supposed to play about a half, maybe into the third quarter. That's the game I really want to see. Okay, how sharp do we look? Do we look like we're ready to go play a regular season game right now? Are we executing well on defense? Are we forcing turnovers? Are we playing the run well? Are we jumping on routes and look like a good team getting ready to enter the preseason? And that's the only game I care about is that third preseason game.
I'll say I care about all of them, but that's only because I need to see these defensive backs with a lot of snaps.
There you go. There you go.
You know, I don't really, anytime they line it up, I have to be totally honest. Anytime that the Florida League goes out on the field, I want to see buttholes and elbows, and I want to see winning scores. And if I'm totally honest, that's going to be it. Being realistic, the only thing that matters is going to Minnesota, bringing home a W, coming home, going up against the Patriots, getting a W there. This team, I do believe, and I don't think that I'm very far out of line to say this. This team has the potential to be that team that can go to the next level. And I do believe that's a design because if you break it down in the simplest terms, if Sean Payton doesn't take it to the next level, he's likely going to be unemployed. That being said, I think that this has the makings of being one of those quote unquote very special teams.
We'll see. We'll see how this plays out. Deuce, I want to thank you for joining us this evening. As always, your opinions, your contributions are incredibly valuable and helpful. In a sea of noise out there, you're a good voice for us to go to when it comes to this, because you break, like we said in the beginning, you break down the film, you look at stuff, and you really give a unique perspective, and you make it in a way that most people can understand it, and that's always helpful. Because the more people understand the game, the more you can appreciate what's going on out there, rather than, why is Drew Brees throwing to an empty spot in the field? Doesn't he see the receiver? And all too often, going to Saints games, listening to fans talk, that's how I feel like they think that Drew Brees sits in that huddle and imagines, okay, drawing in the dirt, you go to the Buick, cut across there and pick it up right by the fire hydrant. And you go deep. You just go deep. That's all you got to do.
Yeah.
You go to the popcorn vendor, you chase the guy over there in the yellow smock. Deuce, I want to thank you so much for making the time to accommodate us here. And I've been getting messages this entire time. And for them, I want to say thank you very much for being on our show with us. Please, if you would, take a moment and tell everyone how they can follow you, follow your work, your film study, so on and so forth, how they can follow your work.
Yeah, sure. Well, first off, guys, thanks for having me on. I definitely appreciate you guys thinking about me, so that's pretty awesome. And as far as following me, I won't give y'all guys a ton of links or anything. Keep it real simple. Go to the Canal Street Chronicles website, and you'll find my video film breakdowns twice a week. Or you can follow me on Twitter at RevDeuceWindham, REVDEUCEWINDHAM. That's simple. I mean, go to the website, or you can hunt me down on Facebook or Twitter. I talk with everybody.
And I can vouch for that. He does. It's not always and it's always good. I'll put it that way.
Hey, Deuce had me sold when we went live, and I'm looking in the background the whole time he's talking, and I'm looking at the Rebel hat he's got on. I see the Death Star. I see the Enterprise back there. I saw Cap's original shield. I see the saber, and I'm looking at those boxes down there. I'm going, okay, it's a Star Trek box. What is that right there? That appeals to the inner comic book geek, inner sci-fi geek that I am, so I totally dig it. I really love it. So you can come on to any time as long as I get to talk about that stuff behind you.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, I also already went ahead and sent you a link to the different unboxing videos I did on my YouTube channel, so you can actually see some of these subscription boxes and try them out. I think you'll really like them.
Okay, good deal. Good deal.
That's what I wanted to say. I wanted you to plug your YouTube channel that you and the missus were doing. But also, I wanted to congratulate you publicly on her for Eli. How's the little guy doing these days?
He is good. He is getting very large. He's like in the 95th percentile of size for his age. He is 3 months old, very tall, and like 17 pounds. He's a monster. He was. I'll just put it this way: he was holding himself up at 2 weeks old.
Yeah,
he is way ahead of the game.
So we're
I can relate.
We'll be covering him here shortly then, right?
Yeah, we'll probably have to prepare him for college in the next couple of years. He's growing.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, when he starts playing Little League football, we're going to get Deuce breaking down the film on his son playing football.
That definitely will be happening. Yes.
Hey, I did it too. Believe me, I did it too. Thank you again, Deuce, for joining us. And, this time next week, we have a preseason game in the books. In fact, we have football, I believe, all weekend. I think it starts Thursday night with the Saints game. But I think there's a game Friday, Saturday, and Sunday week. So we're at football all week. We'll talk about play it out Thursday, next Tuesday. And Sean, I believe we have a couple other guests we're trying to line up for next week too. And
yes,
we also have a preview show to talk about.
We're kind of negotiating. Is that the right word?
Yeah, that's how it's negotiating.
Yeah, negotiate. We're negotiating contracts. We're dealing with quite a few different guests right now. Potential guests. And it's all for you guys. We thank you so much for your support. For all of the non and Rev Deuce and myself, and obviously myself at the bottom of that spectrum there. For all the stuff that we know, the stuff that we talk about, absolutely nothing without you guys punching on that link and joining us every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. For your support, it means everything in the world to us, and we wouldn't be us without you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As always, we appreciate you guys sticking with us, even though we always go over time. That's what happens when you want to talk Saints football. You can't stick to an hour. So thank you again for joining us, and join us next week on Under the Dome. Good night, everybody.